Welcome to Pure Gold, an honest, no-nonsense take on what it means to live daily with sexual integrity, offering practical tips and suggestions on how to strengthen your character, deepen your transparency, and grow in truth through the power of Jesus Christ.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Pure Gold podcast. This is Frank Honus, and I want to thank you guys so much for listening. I am really excited to be able to re-release a podcast that has probably gotten the most attention, a video on our YouTube channel that's gotten the most views since we've ever been doing podcasting. Of all the episodes that we've released, this episode has probably gotten just, so much attention, and for the right reasons, I think. And this episode was how porn can destroy your marriage. And so several years ago, I believe I was actually on my 5th year of recovery at that point. My wife and I sat down to do sort of a joint interview and to just talk to each other, and mostly for me to ask her questions of what pornography did to our marriage. How was she affected? What was she feeling? How did she deal with the effects of, my addiction? And again, this has always been probably the most popular episode. So every once in a while, I like to pull it out of the archive and I like to re-release it because it is so good. And, the reality is that pornography does destroy marriage, unfortunately. But there's also, I think, a greater reality in which it doesn't have to. And marriages can be healed, they can be restored, and there's some really great things that can happen from a marriage that is redeemed from sexual impurity. And so that's how our marriage went. And by the grace of God, he brought great healing into my life. He brought great healing into my wife, Tracey, her life. And we now are proponents of helping people, helping couples who deal with this in their marriage. So if you are dealing with this in your marriage, if you're a husband who's struggling with pornography addiction, I just want to encourage you to reach out to me. You can reach out to me on the website, pflhome.com. If you're in a marriage, if you're a wife, spouse of someone who's struggling, and you just need some encouragement, some support, my wife Tracey is more than available to lend her ear, to listen, to offer encouragement to you. Again, you can reach out to her if you go to the Support for Wives section under support on our website, pflhome.com. And we'd love to just help you guys out for, in whatever way we can. But this, again, was an episode entitled How Porn Can Destroy Your Marriage. And we do hope that it's a blessing to you. And just really, really encouraged to be able to re-release this episode on Pure Gold. Enjoy the podcast. Tracey, when I first shared with you about my sexual addiction, I think it was around 2008, 2009. I can't remember if we were still dating. I think I remember sharing with you, we were on a beach at one time, and I remember sharing with you some things that I had struggled with, and I was pretty vague about a lot of stuff. I wasn't very, very transparent. What were some of the immediate thoughts and feelings that surfaced kind of within your heart and your mind? What were you thinking and feeling about all this?
I think you're right. I do remember we were on the beach one time when we were dating, and you shared with us. However, when you shared it, I remember you sharing it almost as if it was something in the past, not something that was currently going on. And at the time, me knowing nothing about sexual addiction or anything along those guidelines, I kind of thought it was something that you had walked through, and you were sharing it with me as a piece of your past, not as a part of what was currently going on in your life. But as time went on, when we were dating, and even at the beginning of our engagement, I would notice certain times when your mood or personality would change. And as I began to talk to you a little bit more, and you began to open up a little bit, kind of discovered that would often happen when you would have a slip up, or when you would be viewing pornography, or something had just gone on. And I don't know, so it was little things like that kind of hinted to me like, hey, there's something going on here.
Yeah. Did you panic at all when I first shared with you? I mean, was there a sense of,
Not
whoa,
when
I
you
can't walk into
first
this?
shared it with me, because again, I thought it was something from your past, but as I started noticing more and more of this going on, and it being like a habit almost, I started getting panicked, especially because we were beginning to walk into a period of engagement to be married, and I was thinking, it scared me, honestly.
Yeah. So fast forward a little bit, we get engaged, or we go through this dating time in our lives. We get engaged, we get married. What was the hardest part of being married to a man who wrestled with an addiction to pornography, addiction to masturbation, lust, fantasy, a sexual addiction? What was, if you could narrow it down to one thing or a couple things, what were the most difficult, most challenging places for you?
The obvious ones would be how it made me feel as a woman. I know we're going to get into that a little bit later on too, but I think something that people don't often realize comes along with this is a lot of lying and minimizing and shading of the truth. And I think that was the hardest, because it was almost like I didn't know what was real and what wasn't real. I didn't know when you were being honest with me, and basically just that lack of transparency.
Yeah. Were there ever moments where you thought, I just can't handle this anymore, I'm leaving, I'm out of here? Did you ever feel like those moments came up in your mind? Could you describe those moments a little bit for me?
Yeah, I remember the first one was actually when we were still engaged. I believe it was getting close to the time of our wedding, maybe a couple months before, because I think we had even sent out invitations, because my mind was racing like, how are we going to undo all this? Mm-hmm. But I remember taking my engagement ring off and giving it back to you, because it was almost like you talked about being serious about recovery, but it was obvious that you hadn't reached that real point of brokenness yet. And I remember giving my engagement ring back to you and telling you, I can't do this. I can't imagine going through a life like this when I don't know if you're being honest with me, how it makes me feel as a woman belittled, and just the insecurities that it brought about, things that I hadn't really felt before.
That was a pretty scary moment for me. I think that was actually the moment of brokenness that I had always been wanting, and I think that was the place where my addiction not only had warped my mind and messed my life up, but now I could see the way it was damaging somebody else's life, my own soon-to-be, actually unsure at that moment, but soon-to-be wife. So here's the big question I guess I have. What effects did my porn addiction, my sexual addiction, have upon you as my wife? And maybe just to preface that a little bit, I want to remind guys out there, people out there listening, that your addiction not only affects you, but as you move into a relationship with other people, even just your family and your friends, not even your husband or wife, your addiction spills over and hurts other people. So just as a preface to that, Tracey, what kind of effects do you feel like my addiction had upon your life, especially in the first year?
As a female, I mean, in general, females sometimes struggle with having insecurity and different things. Not always, but at times, just as a woman, walking through different things can cause that. But this definitely caused that to peak, knowing the type of things that you were viewing, and the thought of getting married and walking into all that. And then even once we were married, the thought of just my husband comparing me to things, which I know and understand from even in that season, we were graciously, a friend came along who is a counselor and walked us through a lot of different things. And even individually, me as a spouse caused me to understand a lot about sexual addiction that I had no idea. And it brought a lot of light. It shed a lot of light. And also me searching out for myself, trying to gain and understand knowledge on this. And as I prayed for you and journeyed with you through this. But it definitely brought insecurities about inside me that I didn't even know were there, and that honestly at the time I thought shouldn't even have to be here. I shouldn't even have to walk through this. I didn't ask for this, or I didn't want this. Those kinds of thoughts ran through my mind a lot, like I don't deserve this.
Yeah.
the distrust that was built there, that's a huge thing in any kind of marriage or any kind of relationship, and feeling like you don't have that with the person who's supposed to be closest to you, the person who you're sharing intimacy with, that brought about a lot of challenges too. I know I struggled with comparing myself, which is something that I know women struggle with, whether their husbands have ever walked in an addiction or not, but it definitely caused that to arise in me, and I didn't like that at all, because I had learned to appreciate who I was and love who God had created me to be, but it caused those insecurities to creep in as well.
Maybe as kind of this is off script a little bit, but when did the turning point come for you of there's something wrong with me, and Frank looks at porn and masturbates and does all this stuff because he's displeased, or he doesn't like the way I look, or he's not in love with me, or he's not attracted? So when was the turning point from that to, Frank there's a lot of things in his life, there's a lot of holes in his heart and his soul, a lot of things he's trying to fill. There's insecurities, there's even things from his childhood that he is reeling from and healing from, and really acknowledging for the first time. A lot of gaps and holes. When did that turning place take place for you?
A lot of it happened. You went away on this weekend. This was after we were already married, maybe within the first 3 to 6 months of our marriage. It was a weekend that the Underground put on, and just to throw a little plug out there, there's a ministry called Underground Ministry, and they do these intensive 4-day weekends where spouses, they do one for men, but they also do one for spouses as well, to cover the area of sexual addiction. And I believe they have, I think it's like 6 months worth of counseling packed within these couple days. And I remember you went to this retreat or this weekend or whatever it was, and I was home by myself that weekend, and I had made up my mind that while you were away, I was gonna study on this subject as well. I was gonna seek God and just spend that time, and God did a lot within me in those couple days, just as He was meeting with you apart from me as you were journeying through a lot of these things. There were many moments that I felt Him come into that room and meet with me as well. And when you came back from that weekend, it was obvious that the brokenness that had begun had just continued, and I saw a humility in you that I hadn't seen, and I don't think I'd ever seen that depth of humility and just your desire to be open and transparent. And I remember that night you sitting before me and sharing with me so much of what had gone on in your life, things that had happened back when you were a child up into this moment, and just many of the things that had played into this addiction. And to see that humility and brokenness in you, really, it touched my heart, and it broke me at the same time. And I could tell from that moment on there was a huge turn of events. It became not just something that, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a turnaround. It was a turnaround point. I think from that moment on there was no wishy-washy or minimizing things. Your transparency changed a lot then, and I think that's when honestness and trust began to really build. Yeah. The trust thing was something that was, when you lose trust in a relationship you have like that, it takes a lot of time to build back, and I think that's something we've built over the years. It's definitely not something that happens overnight, and I think that was a moment when the building blocks began to start back up. During that same weekend when you were away, one of the things that the Lord really spoke to me, and at first it kind of angered me to hear it, but I remember God said to me as I was praying the one night, "You chose this," and I was thinking, what in the world? I did not choose to marry a man with this kind of addiction. Right. I did not choose to feel this way, Yeah. And the Lord just reminded me that, Tracey, so many years ago, you placed your life in my hands, and you said, "I want to be used by you, God, whatever that may look like." Mm-hmm. And I know, in terms of ministry and stuff, I viewed it as something very different. Mm-hmm. But the Lord has definitely used this in an area of ministry in my life personally. I know in your life personally, and we've been able to use it to touch other individuals' lives as well. So
yeah. And guys, just as a men, just as a cautionary thing, that honesty and transparency was started within me in that weekend and continued and continues to today. I mean, there are things that I share with my wife, even something I shared with her yesterday, the day before, that, something from my childhood that, did I feel guilty about? No. Did I feel afraid to share with her? Not necessarily. Was it a little awkward to go there? Was it a little weird to go there and relive that moment? Yeah, but it's just the fact of my wife knowing me that much deeper that I care about. Tracey didn't really have a whole lot to share with me, and like a fix or prescription or something. She just said, "Yeah, I bet you that was a bad memory," or "I bet you that kind of felt weird." And I said, "Yeah," but it was just the communication of telling her, and it was just letting her in my world. Were there slips that happened after I came back from that weekend? Probably. There were probably things that happened, and in the ensuing months, and but as the brokenness and transparency continued, that led the healing, and that almost helped me for there not to be many slips and falls, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Something else that just came to my mind is that when you got back from that weekend, it was like all the stops were pulled out. You were willing to do whatever it took, even the things that made you really uncomfortable. I think we had set up web filtering on our computers and stuff, but we also had decided to, since we had smartphones, to do it on our phones as well, on different devices. And I know for someone like my husband, he's very techie, and even to this day, we keep those things in place. He's had probably close to 4 or 5 years of sobriety now, but even then, we still keep these things in place just as a precaution. And as a wife, it gives me peace of mind. I kind of say that to the husbands out there. I know that it may go ahead and cause you not to be able to work with or download certain apps or be able to do different things, and there's lots of different ways, I'm sure there's a million apps out there that do similar things, but my husband was willing to go ahead and do things that were even uncomfortable for him, and that caused him to have kind of limits or boundaries. And because he was willing to do that, it showed me that, hey, he's really serious about that. And even today, he's willing to keep those things in place after he's had years of sobriety. And I don't know, I'm sure some of it's for his own health, but I'm sure a lot of it too is for my own peace of mind, because he knows that my wife can rest assured that there is protection here, just in case anything were to pop up or try to distract me or lure me away. Or that's really good. So kind of turning the dial a little bit here from our story to your advice and your thoughts. What kind of advice would you give to the wives out there, the women out there, wives whose husband's sexual addiction is destroying their marriage? What are some quick things you might share with wives who just are hurting, they're struggling, quite honestly, they want out of this marriage? What would you say to them? Well, first of all, I would say don't ignore this. I know sometimes wives think that I just don't want to deal with it, or I don't want to think about it, like he just needs to go and take care of it. But if you're married, then you've become one, and if he's journeying through something just as if you were doing it together. And so, as easy as it would be to just kind of write it off and tell him, take care of your problem, it's not that easy. It's something you have to be open to dealing with as well. Just as I was talking about earlier, how the biggest thing that has made the hugest difference in our marriage is the honesty and transparency and the openness that has caused that trust to build. At the beginning, it's very hard for us as wives to hear all that as our husbands are really diving into this process. And so those are probably the hardest months. Probably that first year is the toughest year, just as so many things are changing, and as he's hopefully, as he should be, being transparent and open and honest with you. Just being willing to allow yourself to feel that, to feel the hurt, to feel, the different emotions that come with that, and to work through them, not to just ignore them or push them under the rug, because it'll keep coming back up if you don't. And just to remember that if you are married, you've committed your life to this person, and just making that choice to journey with them and believing in them and continue daily praying for them, and that they can make it through this.
Now, I asked Tracey not only to speak to wives, but I also asked her to think about and speak to husbands and men out there too. So likewise, what kind of words would you share with men who are struggling with this kind of stuff? And again, it's destroying their marriage, it's destroying their lives, their wives. Fire away. We need it. We need it, Tracey. We need it, and we need it.
Be truthful. I think sometimes guys get this. They think, well, if I don't tell her, it's protecting her, or it's keeping her safe if I keep it hidden. But one way or another, the truth always comes out. Mm-hmm. And it's better if it comes out from you and it doesn't come out from your wife seeing it some way or finding out, in a different form. I think that's the biggest thing. I think having a compassion, because I know you might think, well, it's hard on me. I'm the one who's having to break this. I'm the one to have, but it's also hard on your wife. I know people have probably heard it said that anytime someone receives a bad comment, it takes, how many do they say? How many positive comments to make up for that
or
one?
Something, yeah.
So you can imagine as a wife and as a woman feeling this kind of blow from your husband. And I think just in the season of all this going on, following it up with as much love and compassion and words of affirmation as you possibly can. I remember asking my husband different times, like, how do you see me? How do you view me? And him just being, sometimes he'd be vague. Well, I think you're beautiful. Well, no, I need you to be really specific. And I think it's because sometimes when we do go through something like this and it's really hard, it takes a lot more of that positive affirmation and, the truth, hearing the truth from our husbands. So not being afraid to lavish that on your wives, especially as they're journeying through something like this.
Yeah. And guys, too, I think part of it, as I was thinking, is what you were sharing there, Tracy, is that, when a man or a woman is trapped in a sexual addiction all their lives, you're not really able to appreciate the other person's beauty. You're not really able to understand and see that other person's beauty. And not just physically, but emotionally. I mean, certainly physically, but emotionally, spiritually, in all those ways, because what have you been viewing all your life? We look at, we pull up these exactly. We pull up these false, fake scenarios, false love, not even love at all, of two people going at it. And so that is our concept of love and beauty, which is so perverted and wrong. So when we get married, it's almost impossible in some ways for us to look at the other person. And like you'd asked me many times, describe, tell me how you think I'm beautiful. Don't just tell me you think I'm beautiful, But I think for me, the more healing I found and the more ground I covered, I was able to appreciate your beauty. I was able to enjoy your beauty. You were able to understand that I enjoyed your beauty and appreciated it. Not just in our intimacy, but in our daily life together, in our day in and day out time. So I think that's a huge thing, that when you find that healing and you walk in recovery, you're able to really appreciate and to enjoy and to make the other person feel comfortable too. So last question, and just I had tacked this on at the end because I as a husband, I need to hear this, and I know that we need to talk about this, but it's important that your wife feels this. But so in the 5 years coming up here in August 17th, August 15th, somewhere, it was around the time we got married. I'm not. She's shooting me the eyes
terrible.
Here. August 15th. I'm thinking about.
I know why he got saved on the 17th.
I'm thinking about my marriage on August 15th, and I'm thinking about my salvation on August 17th. Yeah. But it really was around when we got married on August 15th that I started this recovery process. Right. So that's the date I was thinking about. So she's about to punch me in the face. Do you believe in the 5 years that we've been married that the Lord has brought healing to our marriage? And if so, how?
I do. Sometimes I stand back and at times it almost brings me to tears just to think about how God is able to restore something in a way that we couldn't even imagine. I was sharing with a woman not long ago as we were talking. It was something she was sharing with me how she was feeling in regards to her spouse struggling. And I told her, I said that the depth of love and intimacy and transparency and joy that I have in my marriage now, I never imagined was possible, even when I dreamed about marriage, before I knew my husband had a sexual addiction, before we walked through the process of healing all that, even before all that, just as I dreamed about marriage and love and my future spouse, what we have today is deeper and more true than I could have ever imagined. And I know it took walking through some hard things, but perhaps walking through a lot of that caused the closeness that we have today. And just, I absolutely love it, and I thank God every day for it. I know that during, as you were coming out of your, you began to walk in a season of sobriety and have some years under your belt, and you began things like the podcast and reaching out to other men. I remember at the beginning of that season, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, feeling kind of awkward because this stuff was going out. He was sharing it with different people, and feeling a little awkward knowing that, okay, my husband's sharing with people that he struggled with a sexual addiction, and just the thoughts that would probably go through people's minds, and just me personally struggling with that. And it's probably pride within me that was struggling with that. But the Lord just began over time to really work on me with that. And like today, as I sit back and I see how many lives, not just locally, but throughout the U.S. and even different places in the world, just different lives that you've been able to touch because you've been honest about your story and because you've reached out, and even the different couples that we've been able to talk and help walk through and stuff, that brings immense joy to my heart. And that, to me, that's where, I'm sure many years ago when this addiction first started, when you were first exposed to something, the enemy probably thought, wow, I'm just going to wrap his life up into a downward spiral and just watch it burn, crash and burn. But just to see how when you reach that moment of brokenness and you begin to seek God's healing for your life, just to see how he has taken it and he has transformed it and he's used it for his glory to touch other people's lives too.
Yeah.
That's true healing. That's true restoration. That's true freedom. That's true joy.
Yeah.
And that makes it all worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, honey, for being on this podcast, episode 100. Next week, stay tuned. It's going to be the Pure Life podcast for women, hosted by Tracey I. No? Maybe one day. I've been asking her for over a year to be on this interview. We've been planning it for a while. I've been preparing her. So, I really appreciate it. And next time I have you on, we can set up the video camera and we can set up all the microphones and the lights and everything like that. I appreciate it so much. And guys, just take these words to heart that my wife shares. Our story is just one story. Every story is different. Every marriage is different. But I do believe that what the lives that we've tried to live in the last 5 years, my recovery, the effort that I've tried to put into this, which I feel like has been significant, can also be your story too. And you can find that same kind of healing that I have found and continue to find. And our marriage continues to find. Every marriage is growing. We certainly have, valleys that we still walk through, weaknesses, things that we are still growing in. I still have a lot of areas as a husband that I need to grow in and mature in. And so I just, want to put this, but this is one aspect, one part of our story. It's a huge part of our story that we get to share with other couples. So thanks again, hon. Appreciate it and love you. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts about this recovery that you've walked through as well. And I know it was a little nerve-wracking for you, but thanks so much, guys, for listening this week to this interview.
Thanks for listening to Pure Gold, our weekly podcast from Purity for Life. Don't forget to visit our website for additional content, including our entire podcast archive, articles, links, and videos to help encourage you on your journey for sexual purity. All this and more can be found at pflhome.com.